want to talk to you about tables. But friendship between men is something that I think has been damaged. I think it's been damaged by feminism. And I think that's one of the crimes that has occurred. It's hard for men to be friends sometimes nowadays. And that needs to be. Men need that. So, this friendship that we're going to look at this morning begins with a severed head. Oh. I'd like for you to think of a young man, most likely around the age of 16 years old, and in his hands he's holding by the hair a head.
She found him.
And people say, we're worried we're going to disrupt your thoughts.
You should have just stopped talking because you know we were watching.
Yeah. She should have just stopped talking until she had what she needed. He's holding a severed head. Just prior, he had been down in the valley, and there he was confronted by Goliath. Going to take that severed head and pop it back onto Goliath's body for a moment. Because before these two engaged in battle, there was some trash talk going on. That's how we would refer to that today. And what did Goliath say to David? You're nothing, boy. You're nothing. I will feed your dead body to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David responded back, did he not? And he said, you come at me with sword and javelin and spear and shield. I come at you in the name of God. And he'll deliver you into our hands this day. And then the slingshot started spinning, right? And that stone sailed through the air and it hit that giant in the forehead. And he fell. Now, one of the things David had said prior is, I will cut your head off. Problem was, he didn't have a sword, did he? Saul's sword was too cumbersome, along with the rest of Saul's armor. And David is there with nothing but a slingshot and a giant who lays at his feet. And two armies on either side of the mounts looking at each other in dead, stunned silence. And David walks over and takes the sword of Goliath and pulls it out of the sheath and cuts his head off. And there's still silence. And David picks that head up and holds it for all to see. And then the screaming started. The Philistine army began screaming in terror and running, and the army of Israel started shouting in victory. And they began chasing the Philistines and routing them and slaughtering them. And David is still holding this head. And the king is seated in his tent looking over this. And everyone is overcome with adrenaline and zeal. And They just saw a miracle. And Saul says in 1 Samuel chapter 17 to Abner, whose boy is that? Whose boy is that? He may remember David's name. They had just had a conversation a little bit earlier. Whose son is this? And Abner says, I don't know. I don't know. Saul says, go get him. And David is still carrying this head with the stone in the forehead, lodged there, and he's walking into the presence of the king. And the king says, whose son are you? And he says, I am your servant Jesse. I'm the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. I'm a shepherd. Now, who's also standing next to Saul at this moment? Saul's son, Jonathan. Saul's son, Jonathan, is standing right there. You know what Jonathan does at this moment? Jonathan takes off his armor and puts it on David. Gives David his sword, gives David his bow, gives David his shield, gives David everything he's got. Jonathan had the best of the best. He was the king's son. He was a warrior. He also knew what it was to take a man's life. As far as we know, this was David's first time.
He whacked a few lions, so.
Yep. Now, Jonathan is also overcome. And this is the beginning of verse 18. As soon as David had finished speaking to Saul, it's just the words are just out of his mouth. The soul of Jonathan, that's his very life breath. The soul of Jonathan was knit. They were best friends from the start. When your soul is knit to the soul of another, that's brothers in arms. That's friendship. Most people never have a friendship like that. The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And from that point forward, Saul would not let David return to the house of Jesse. He conscripted him into his army, into his elite fighting force, and David was going to serve next to Jonathan, and that's exactly what they did. And David slew Philistines. The people of Israel had never seen anything like this since Samson. David was so apt at this. It was like he could stare at a Philistine and they would fall down dead. Did it affect the entertainment industry at the time? Sure did. When David came into town, what did the women do? They would dance and sing and shake their tambourines and all other musical instruments. And what was the lyric that was in everybody's ear? Saul has slain his thousands. David has slain his tens of thousands. Who was right there with David during this? Jonathan. Jonathan was right there. Verse 12, when Saul heard this song, it greatly affected Saul. Remember, Saul has already lost the kingdom in the long run. Samuel has already said, you disobeyed God. The kingdom is being ripped away from you. Your house will not continue. Saul has to live with that. And now David is on the scene. And when Saul hears this song, it caused him to be afraid of David, because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. That's exactly right. We are told that multiple times. The Spirit of God pulled away from Saul. And what was put in its place? An evil spirit. A spirit of resentment. A spirit of anger. A spirit of envy was upon Saul. Now, what was upon David? The Spirit of God rested upon David. And Saul knew this, and it caused him to have fear. And how do men act when they have fear? Horribly. Horribly. Now, Saul has a daughter, and Saul comes to David, and he says, how about you marry my older daughter? He's not a fool. He wants to make a political alliance. And David says, I am a poor man. I'm not going to marry your daughter. And Saul marries that one off to another man. Now, Saul has a younger daughter. Her name's Michal. And she loved David. Of course she did. Of course she loved David. And they told Saul, and that thing pleased Saul. When Jesse told me that he loved Brielle, it pleased me. When Marinko told me he was going to marry Katie, it pleased me. I praise God. When MJR conquered the heart of Emily, it pleased me. I didn't think y'all would laugh at that, but yeah. That was a big battle.
We just learned some personality traits right there.
Katie's nodding her head yes. Why did it please Saul? Wasn't for that reason.
Smear.
Saul was going to use this as a means to kill David. So Saul comes to David and he says, hey, you refused me once. You want to marry my younger daughter, Michal? And David goes, I don't have the money for the dowry on that, my king. And Saul says, that's okay. I'm going to get you killed. Here's the cost. Here's the cost. Bring me the foreskins of 100 Philistines. No money. This is a different type of currency. And it's done to get David dead. That's a horrible sentence. But that was the reasoning behind it. Now, David at this time has started to gain a following. And Saul gives him a short period of time. We're not told how long it is, but he gives him a short period of time to fulfill this task. And David tells his men, listen, I've got to go and kill 100 Philistines. And they said, we got your back. And they killed 200. They killed 200 Philistines. And they took from them what was required. And David walks in and he pays that to Saul. I'm telling you, Jonathan's watching this. Jonathan is watching this, and now his best friend has become his brother-in-law. They're married, David and Michal. Well, that's where we pick up verse 29. When Saul saw this, I think Saul observed that David now had men who were helping him. And he was even more afraid of David. And Saul was David's enemy continually. Don't lose that. Saul wants David out of the picture. Jonathan is David's best friend, and David is married to Saul's daughter. Saul attempts to kill David how many times?
Several times.
Several times. Jonathan was able to calm his father down at times. He came to his father and said, look, David's only done good for you. Don't kill him. And Saul says, okay. He can come into the house. David begins playing the harp. That evil desire comes over Saul, and he casts a spear at David and tries to pin him to the wall. That happened at least twice. Yeah. And David sees the animosity, and David knows that Saul wants him dead, and David himself is trying to preserve his life, and he says to Jonathan, I can't come and eat at that table anymore. I am one step away from death, Jonathan. Your dad wants to kill me. Jonathan says, I don't think so. David says, yeah, let's test him. They do. Saul fails. Now, Jonathan and David had a pre-appointed place and time to meet about this issue, and they worked out a sign between the two of them. You'll remember, Jonathan shoots 3 arrows out into the field. He's just practicing. I saw your target set up the other day for arrow practice. Yeah, you drive right by him every time, don't you, on the driveway? Yeah, Jamie's been practicing shooting his arrows. And Jonathan shoots arrows. He says to David, if it's safe for you to come back, I will tell the servant boy when I send him to gather the arrows, come closer. The arrows are closer to me. That means it's safe. If I tell the servant boy, the arrows are beyond you, boy, you must go further, that's the sign that my father wants to kill you and you have to stay on the lam. The arrows are beyond you, boy. And David begins crying. David begins sobbing because he's lost his best friend. The servant boy comes back. Jonathan gives him his bow, gives him his quiver, gives him his arrows, and he says, go to town. Go back to town. Leave me alone. David comes out from hiding, and they fall upon one another in grief. And this is in Samuel chapter 20. Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David. And Jonathan says in this covenant, may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. Who was David's enemy continually?
His father.
His father. This is a horrible burden for Jonathan, because he's loyal to his father and he's best friends with David. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for Jonathan loved him as he loved his own soul. This is the second to the last time they met. David has a whole band of soldiers now, but they are hunted by Saul and his army. Continuously, Saul is trying to kill David. One more time, Jonathan meets David, and he says, look, you're going to be the king. Who rightfully would have been the king? Jonathan. In fact, Saul tells Jonathan, you know why I want to kill this guy? Because you'll never be king while he's alive. They meet one more time, and Jonathan says to David, you will be king, and I'll be your second in command. Jonathan's a great man. He's humble. He's a warrior. The best of friends. And he's willing to take that second position. That's not how it played out, is it? That's not how it played out. In 1 Samuel chapter 31, Saul is also warring with the Philistines. This is just an ongoing issue. And Saul is at battle with the Philistines, and his sons are with him. And in verse 2, the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons. The Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. Saul died that day also. And what did they do with the bodies? They took their bodies and they pinned them to the wall
Displayed them.
as a display. As a horrendous public display. And David is distraught. Take the time to read the psalm that David wrote over this very moment. David is distraught. But from that moment forward, the Bible says that the house of Saul gets weaker and weaker, and the house of David waxes stronger and stronger. And there comes a point where nobody can dispute it any longer. David is the king over Israel. David is the king. And God gives David military victory after victory after victory after victory. Wherever he sets his hand against his enemy, he prevails. Success over, and we're going to win so much, you're going to get tired of winning. That's how it was for David. Jonathan had a son. Jonathan had a son. Therefore, Jonathan had a house. And Jonathan, the son of Saul, he was 5 years old when Saul was killed, when Jonathan was killed. Jonathan's son was 5 years old when Jonathan died that day in battle. And word came back from Jezreel that Jonathan had been slain. And Jonathan's son had a nanny, and she was terrified, and she picked up Jonathan's son, and she began running with him. We don't know exactly what happened, but we know she dropped him or she tripped. But the result was that the boy could no longer walk. He was crippled. He was crippled in the feet from that incident. Maybe he broke his back. Don't know. And as she fled in her haste, the boy fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. What is it to be lame then? Your life's done. There is no ADA. There aren't any wheelchairs. There's no scooters. You're a beggar. When you're crippled in your feet, you're a beggar. David made a name for himself. He struck down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt, and the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went. David reigned over all of Israel. It's a beautiful kingdom, and David administered justice and equity to all his people. This is the very next chapter. Now, David remembers. And we talk about remembering. We talk about remembering the Sabbath. We talk about the memorial of remembrance. And David remembers. And David said, is there anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show kindness to my good friend Jonathan? He remembered. And he wants to do what's right. And they said, yeah, there actually is a guy named Ziba. Ziba was a servant in Saul's house. And so David calls forth this servant Ziba, and he says, is there anyone left of Jonathan? And Ziba tells him, yeah, there's a guy named Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul. And David says, bring him to me. So he came to David, and Mephibosheth fell on his face and paid homage. And David said, Mephibosheth? And he said, behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, do not fear. Why? Saul was David's enemy continually. Why do you think Mephibosheth would be afraid? We know he was afraid. We know he was afraid because David tells him, you don't have to be afraid. There's something in the voice of Mephibosheth who's lying on the ground. And David says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father, Jonathan. I will restore to you. He's a beggar. I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your father. This is his own personal jubilee. Remember? He goes from being nothing. And David remembers the covenant that he has with Jonathan, and Mephibosheth is nothing. And now he's a landowner. He's the landowner of Saul's magnitude. So you'll get the land of your grandfather, and you shall eat at my table always. We celebrated Thanksgiving right here last night. Our family, I don't know, has ever celebrated Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving. It's part of being in law enforcement. I almost always worked on Thanksgiving. But we were gathered at a table. And that means a lot. You see, David remembered that covenant. And he could have just said, hey, I'll give you back Saul's land. But that's not what he does. That's not what he does. He says, you'll eat at my table. And Mephibosheth paid homage and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Then Ziba said to the king, according to all that my lord the king commands his servant, so will your servant do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table. Did he eat at the kids' table? Because we had a kids' table last night. You remember eating at the kids' table when you were little?
No.
Yep.
The conversation was much more boring at the kids' table.
Not if you're a kid.
No, it wasn't ours. We all looked forward to the day where we would be graduated up to the adult table.
Expectation changes too, though.
Everything. That's not what happened here. Was he just put at the end or off to the side as an outcast? That's not how David treated Mephibosheth, this lame man. He brings him in and puts him at the table, and Mephibosheth ate like one of the king's sons. He sat right next to Absalom, and he was there just like one of the king's sons. That's the friendship covenant that David is fulfilling for Jonathan. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servant. So Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem, and he ate always at the king's table. Don't forget, he was lame in both of his feet. Tables. We talked about holy spaces. What was in the temple? There was a table set up in the temple, and on that table were 12 loaves of bread, and those loaves of bread were, they were replaced, they were transferred out, they were replenished every Sabbath. Each loaf represented a tribe. But that table in that temple, God says, is covenant. David bringing this book. We go from the severed head of Goliath to the head of the table where David sat. Psalm chapter 23. You're very familiar with this psalm, aren't you? What does David say in verse 5? You, O God, you prepare a table before me. Do you see the hierarchy here? David's the king of the land, but there's one above him, the king of the universe. Who provides David's table? You do, God. You provide for my table, and I provide their table. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. It goes without saying, it was a big deal. You open up your table. Who do you have at your table? These things never change with God. As much as a table meant to Moses, to Saul, to David, there was a table that those disciples sat around. Matthew chapter 9, here in Matthew 9, Matthew, the tax collector, has been called, and he invites Jesus to come to his house for dinner. And Jesus reclined at the table in Matthew's house. Is this going to go over well? No.
Not whatsoever.
This doesn't go over well. Many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your rabbi eat with tax collectors and sinners? You don't do that if you're a spiritual leader. You don't sit at a table with tax collectors. They're traitors. You don't sit at a table with sinners. They're sinners. What does Jesus do? He sits at the table and he breaks bread with them and he has fellowship with them and he listens to them. You ever wonder why people were attracted to Jesus? It wasn't just because he could heal their blindness. Hey, that was a big plus. He listened to them. He had compassion for them. You go, okay, all right, well, he certainly wouldn't sit at the enemy's table, would he? Now, one of the Pharisees, Luke chapter 7, asked Jesus, hey, come over and eat at my house. It's one thing for your follower to ask you to come over and eat, but now your enemy has asked you to come over and eat. And this Pharisee, we know his name. His name is Simon. Simon the Pharisee says, hey, come over and eat with me. And Jesus says, okay. And he went into the Pharisee's house and he reclined at his table. And behold, a woman of the city. She was a sinner. Well, who's not?
That's what I was gonna say. I wonder why that's in there, because everybody there is a sinner.
I think it's because of her profession
Right.
that people go, oh,
Mhm.
we know this person sins. They're not secret. She's a sinner.
Gotcha.
Uh-huh. We got what you're saying. She was a sinner and she learned that Jesus was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house. She brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And they said, you know what? If he was any kind of a prophet at all, he would know what kind of woman this is.
He did,
Yeah.
and he forgave.
And he gave a pretty good parable to Simon about who loves more. One who is forgiven little or one who is forgiven much. But it's done at the table. We talked about the table this morning. We talked about the table of that final Passover. And that's in Luke chapter 22. And when the hour came, Jesus reclined at the table and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired. That word is the same word for lust. Same in the Greek. I have lusted, earnestly desired to have this meal with you, to eat this Passover before I suffer. He initiates that memorial. They have their dispute. And this is what he says in verse 28. To his disciples, you are those who have stayed with me in my trials. And I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom. And in that kingdom you may eat and drink where?
At my table.
At my table. At God's table. They were all sinners. And sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I'll never forget the first time Trundy and I came and met with this group. Bill and Loretta took us to table. It was Red Lobster.
I was gonna say it was the red.
You think that had an effect on us? You open your table up. Because I have sat at the table as every single one of these. I've been the sinner. I have been the hypocrite. I have been the disciple. I have been the dead dog, lame, needing none other than who's at the head of the table. And the saint. Last night, Stephanie and Aaron were at a very fancy wedding. And there was a table, was there not? There was a table. It was a big deal. It was at the Vinoy. That's maybe one of the biggest tables you sit at, is the marriage wedding table. That's when people pull out all the stops, right? That's when people dress to the nines, and that's when people go as extreme as they can, because this is a feast. It is a covenant situation, and we are binding together people in the eyes of God, and we will sit and break bread at this table. It's not for no reason that we do this. It's in the Bible. In closing, listen to the vision that is given to John. In 19, John says, "Then I beheld and I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of many waters, like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, and they are crying out." Hallelujah. No, they are crying out, "Hallelujah! For the Lord our God, the Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice. Let us exult. Let us give him the glory. For there is a marriage. There is a marriage, and it is of the Lamb." Who's the Lamb? The Lamb is Jesus. The Lamb is Jesus. It's not so hard to figure out these symbols, is it? We know this one. The Lamb is Jesus. And he has come, and his bride, who's the bride? The church. Go back to Ephesians chapter 5, right? Ephesians chapter 5. This is a great mystery, but I speak of Christ and the church. He is the groom, and she is the bride. And the bride has made herself ready. It was granted to her to clothe herself. Did she have a pretty gown last night? Yeah. I don't know. You kind of hesitated
It
on
was
that.
beautiful, probably not linen.
She has clothed herself with fine linen, bright and pure. For that fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. What Loretta did was a righteous deed. It clothes the church. It glorifies God. And the angel said to me, "Write this." That's all fine and good. What you hear, what you see, you're impressed. Let me tell you what I want you to write. Write this down, John. Write this down. "Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper That's the table. You can't have a marriage supper without a covenant table. Invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said to me, these are the true words of God. So there's an invitation. We speak about the invitation. What is the invitation? Will you accept? Will you attend? Will you participate? Will you put your knees under that table and have fellowship with God?